My family banned me from their weddings, then tried to break into my house after I didn't invite them to mine. Big mistake. My name is Olivia. I'm 29 years old. And if someone had told me 6 years ago that my wedding day would become the quietest, yet most satisfying act of revenge I'd ever carry out, I would have laughed right in their face. Back then, I wasn't someone who held on to resentment. I was always the one trying to smooth things over, even when it meant swallowing my own feelings. But when the people who are supposed to love you spend years making you feel like you don't belong, something inside you slowly starts to shift. It doesn't happen all at once with some dramatic explosion or emotional breakdown. It's much quieter than that, almost invisible. One day, a door deep inside you simply closes, and without even realizing it, you leave it locked forever. Growing up, I was always the odd one out in my family. I wasn't rebellious or difficult. I just happened to be different. While my brother Derek and my sister Chloe cared about sports, popularity, and fitting in, I was happiest with a stack of books, a chessboard, or a conversation about history or the stars during dinner. You'd think being different would earn you a little teasing or maybe make you feel slightly left out once in a while. In my family, though, it became something much harsher. They wrapped exclusion in jokes, brushed it off with comments like, "We're just kidding," or "You wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway," as if that somehow made it hurt less. At first, it was the little things. Somehow my invitation to birthday parties would mysteriously disappear. Family trips happened without anyone remembering to tell me. I kept telling myself not to take it personally, or at least I did my best to believe that. Then the wedding started, and everything changed. Chloe got married first when I was 24. About a month before the ceremony, she sat me down with a huge fake smile and calmly said, "Olivia, I really think it's better if you don't come. It's going to be a pretty normal wedding, and honestly, it's just not your kind of thing." I just stared at her, blinking, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined what I'd just heard. Then she hugged me like she was doing something kind and promised she'd send me pictures afterward. I stayed home. I didn't argue, I didn't beg, I didn't even cry, although the lump sitting in my throat was so heavy I could barely eat for several days afterward. Mom and Dad acted like nothing unusual had happened. She's the bride, she gets to decide who comes. Dad muttered without bothering to lift his eyes from the newspaper. Mom chimed in right after, saying, "Besides, you would have hated it with all those people you don't know." It was like they'd forgotten I was part of the family too. Like I hadn't spent my entire childhood around half the people sitting on that guest list. 3 years later, Derek got married, and by then, they didn't even pretend to care anymore. I found out he was getting married from Facebook. Someone had posted a blurry picture of my entire family dressed up, smiling around a banquet table, looking happier than ever. The caption proudly read something like, "Family is everything." I sat there staring at my phone while my stomach tied itself into knots. Nobody had called. Nobody had texted. There wasn't a single message letting me know what was happening. Just complete silence followed by a public reminder that I wasn't considered part of the family anymore. You'd think after all of that I would have walked away for good, that I would have accepted reality, cut my losses, and moved on with my life. But hope has a way of hanging on long after it should have disappeared. No matter how many times it gets crushed, it refuses to let go. So I kept trying. I'd show up for holidays, remember birthdays, and reach out every now and then just to check in. Sometimes they'd answer, sometimes they wouldn't. And when they did respond, their politeness always felt forced, like they were talking to a stranger out of obligation instead of family. They'd ask about my job without any real interest. Or they'd make comments about how quiet and uneventful my life seemed, as though that was somehow something to be embarrassed about. Every time I visited, I felt like an unwanted actor walking onto a stage where everyone wished I wasn't part of the performance. The moment that finally broke something inside me wasn't some huge family argument or dramatic confrontation. It happened on an ordinary Saturday afternoon about a year before my own wedding. I drove an hour to Derek's new house for his housewarming party, carrying a gift card and forcing myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could still get better. Looking back, I know I was fooling myself. When I arrived, I rang the doorbell 4 different times before Derek finally answered. The look on his face told me he honestly hadn't expected to see me standing there. Hey, he mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. Mom said you probably weren't coming. I forced a smile anyway. "Well, I'm here," I replied, holding out the gift card. "I brought you a little something." He accepted it so carefully you'd think I had just handed him something dangerous that might explode at any second. When I walked inside, the place was overflowing with people. There was music playing, laughter echoing through every room, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. I recognized plenty of faces, people I'd known since I was a kid, but hardly anyone acted like they recognized me. Maybe they truly didn't. Or maybe they simply couldn't be bothered. I spent a while wandering around, doing my best to join conversations and make small talk, but it felt like every word disappeared into thin air. I'd get a polite smile, maybe a quick response, and then they'd immediately turn back to the people they actually wanted to talk to. Standing there, I felt like a complete stranger at what was supposed to be my own family's celebration. The worst part came later that evening. Chloe had clearly been drinking, and from across the backyard, she suddenly laughed loud enough for everyone to hear before slurring, "Well, at least Olivia didn't ruin anything today." That's got to be a new record. The entire table erupted with laughter like she'd just delivered the funniest joke of the night. I stood completely still while the cheap plastic cup in my hand started cracking from how tightly I was squeezing it. Not one person spoke up for me. Nobody looked uncomfortable or embarrassed. To them, it was just another joke at my expense. Another reminder that I wasn't family. I was entertainment. That night was the moment I finally let go. There wasn't any dramatic confrontation or emotional speech. I didn't yell, slam a door, or demand an apology. I quietly slipped out through the side gate while everyone else was busy laughing, drove the whole way home without turning on the radio, and when I got inside, I deleted the family group chat from my phone without giving it a second thought. About a year later, everything in my life changed for the better when I met Liam. He was everything my family had never been. He was kind, patient, warm, and genuinely interested in getting to know the real me. Instead of rolling his eyes at my random facts, he loved hearing them. He appreciated my quiet personality, laughed with me over my terrible chess games, and made me feel accepted exactly as I was. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone truly saw me instead of looking right through me. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes through happy tears, and before long we were planning our wedding together. We both wanted the same thing, a small ceremony surrounded by close friends, the people we'd chosen as family, and everyone who genuinely cared about us. One evening, we were sitting together at the table with our guest list spread out between us when Liam paused and looked at me. "What about your family?" he asked softly. "Are you planning to invite them?" I sat there thinking about it longer than I expected. Part of me considered offering one last olive branch. Weddings are supposed to heal old wounds and bring families together after all. But then every memory came rushing back. Chloe's fake smile while telling me I wasn't welcome at her wedding. That Facebook picture declaring family is everything while I wasn't even invited. The drunken jokes, the constant exclusion, and years of feeling invisible every time I was around them. Finally, I looked at Liam and answered in a calm, steady voice, "No, I don't want them there." He smiled, leaned over, kissed my forehead, and said, "I'm glad because I want our wedding to be about love, not obligation." Even though we never told them directly, news traveled fast. That's what happens in a small town where everyone seems to know everyone else's business. About a week after we mailed out our invitations, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. It simply read, "Heard you're getting married. When are you sending our invites?" There wasn't a single congratulations, no excitement, no happiness for me. Just the expectation that they were automatically entitled to be there after everything they'd done. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing my reply. I kept it short and simple. There isn't an invitation. The fallout happened almost instantly. My phone started blowing up with group messages, angry texts, and endless complaints from Mom, Dad, Derek, and Chloe. They tried every angle they could think of. They guilt-tripped me, accused me of being selfish, and even rewrote history, pretending we'd always been this close, loving family who couldn't imagine missing such an important day. Chloe even took her frustration to Facebook, posting one of those vague, passive-aggressive messages that everyone knew was about me. Funny how some people forget where they came from. Hope they enjoy their little party without their real family. I never answered them. I didn't argue, defend myself, or waste my time trying to explain anything. Honestly, I barely even opened most of their messages. Instead, Liam and I focused every bit of our energy on creating the wedding we'd always imagined. We filled the guest list with friends who celebrated our engagement like it was their own, co-workers who had stood beside me through some of the hardest moments of my life, and neighbors who treated me with more kindness and love than my own relatives ever had. Those were the people we wanted surrounding us when we promised to spend the rest of our lives together. When our wedding day finally arrived and I stood at the altar watching Liam make his way toward me with the biggest, happiest smile I'd ever seen, something inside me finally settled. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel like the person nobody wanted around. I felt wanted. I felt accepted. Most of all, I felt chosen. But as incredible as that moment was, it wasn't even the best part of the day. The real surprise came after the ceremony had ended. I was talking with guests when someone gently tapped me on the shoulder, wearing the kind of grin that said they were trying very hard not to laugh. It was my longtime neighbor, Mr. Whitfield, a skinny guy closing in on 80 who somehow still had more energy than people half his age. He leaned in with a mischievous smile and quietly said, "Olivia, trust me, you're going to want to see this." Curious, I followed him over to a small group of guests gathered around someone's phone. The second they noticed me coming, they looked like kids trying not to spoil a surprise. One of them turned the phone toward me and said, "You need to see what's happening on Facebook right now." Right there on the screen, I watched an absolute meltdown unfold in real time. Chloe, Derek, and to top it all off, my own mother were flooding Facebook with one angry post after another. They complained about how selfish I was, preached about forgiveness, insisted that family should always come first, and repeated the old line that blood is thicker than water and nobody should ever turn their back on family. It was a complete public disaster, and somehow they didn't seem to realize they were making themselves look worse with every new post. Chloe's post was easily the most dramatic of them all. She wrote, "I can't believe my own sister would leave us out of her wedding after everything our family has done for her. This is absolutely disgusting. Some people have no idea what family really means." Then someone underneath her post asked a simple question. "Didn't you exclude her from your wedding?" After that, nothing. Chloe never replied. All that followed were defensive likes and a handful of petty comments from her friends desperately trying to justify her behavior. Derek wasn't doing much better. His post read, "Looks like Olivia forgot who helped raise her. Maybe she'll remember someday when she's completely alone." Someone immediately answered him with, "Didn't you leave her off your guest list too? Sounds like karma finally caught up with you." That one made me smile. Then there was Mom's post, and somehow it managed to be the saddest of the three. She uploaded an old blurry family picture and wrote, "Some people forget who loved them first." Loved me, I almost laughed out loud standing there. I honestly couldn't remember a single time they'd ever truly made me feel loved. I could tell everyone around me was watching, waiting to see how I'd react. Maybe they expected me to get emotional. Maybe they thought I'd be hurt or furious after seeing those posts. Instead, I simply smiled and gave a small shake of my head. Standing there with Liam's hand finding mine while our friends laughed, celebrated, and cheered all around us, something finally became completely clear. I didn't owe my family a single thing anymore. I wasn't that lonely little girl desperately hoping someone would save me a place at their table. I'd built my own table. I'd created my own life and surrounded myself with people who genuinely loved me. And the people who had spent years shutting me out no longer had a place in it. After that, the rest of the reception felt like something out of a dream. We'd rented a cozy little place called Willowbrook Vineyard just outside town, and the weather couldn't have been more perfect. The sunset painted the sky with shades of gold and pink that looked almost unreal, like the whole evening had been created just for us. Liam and I danced beneath strings of glowing lights while our friends clapped, toasted us, sang far louder than anyone should have, and laughed until their faces hurt. The wedding cake leaned slightly to one side, the music skipped a couple of times, and someone accidentally spilled an entire drink across the dance floor. None of it mattered. If anything, those little imperfections made the day even more memorable. But despite how wonderful everything had been, the family drama still wasn't finished. Not even close. The next morning, I woke up because my phone was vibrating so hard it actually rattled off the nightstand onto the floor. When I picked it up, I found dozens of missed calls, text messages, and voicemails waiting for me. For one brief moment, I wondered if maybe they'd finally come to their senses. Maybe they'd realized how wrong they'd been. Maybe they wanted to apologize and start over. That thought disappeared the second I played the first voicemail. Mom's voice came through cold, sharp, and full of anger. "Olivia, you need to call me back immediately. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're going to regret cutting your family out. Just wait. Nobody will ever love you the way we do." Chloe's message wasn't any better. "Congratulations on your pathetic little wedding. Hope it was worth it, traitor." Then Derek left what might have been the most predictable message of all. After a long, dramatic sigh, he simply said, "You'll come crawling back eventually. You always do." I sat quietly on the edge of the bed, while Liam slept peacefully beside me, listening to every voicemail one after another. With each angry word, every guilt trip, and every empty threat, I realized something surprising. None of it hurt anymore. The pain I'd carried for so many years was gone. Their words didn't cut deep. They barely affected me at all. Honestly, all they sounded like was desperation. I could have answered them. I could have written a long message telling them exactly what I thought about the years of rejection, the insults, and the way they'd treated me. I could have unloaded every ounce of anger I'd ever buried inside. But instead, I chose the one response they hated more than anything else. I gave them nothing. I blocked every single number, deleted every message, and closed that chapter of my life for good. Later that afternoon, Liam and I sat together on the back porch of the little cabin we'd rented, watching the sun slowly disappear behind the hills while we passed a cheap bottle of champagne back and forth. He rested his head against my shoulder and quietly asked, "Do you have any regrets?" I thought about it for a moment before smiling and squeezing his hand. "Not a single one," I answered. In the end, my family had unknowingly been right about one thing. Family really is everything. The difference is that real family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people you choose. And for the first time in my life, I knew I'd chosen the right one. It didn't take very long before my silence started getting to them. During the first few days after the wedding, all I heard was constant noise. Furious voicemails, angry Facebook posts, and passive-aggressive texts arriving at every hour of the day and night. I ignored every single one of them. Instead of wasting my energy on their drama, I threw myself into married life with Liam. We slept in without setting alarms, wandered through little towns holding hands, and laughed over the smallest things, like my talent for constantly losing our hotel key or his habit of letting every cup of coffee go cold before he finished it. It was peaceful. More importantly, it was the kind of peace I'd spent my entire life searching for. Apparently, though, my family couldn't stand the fact that I'd found it, especially now that they weren't the ones controlling the situation. About a week later, the messages started changing. Mom's texts weren't filled with as much anger anymore. Instead, they were packed with desperation. One message read, "Family belongs together. Please call me. We're still your parents. We deserve to be part of your life. Think about how much you've hurt us after everything we've done for you, Olivia." Even then, there wasn't a single apology, not one acknowledgement of the years they spent pushing me away. Instead, they continued rewriting reality until I became the villain, simply because I'd finally stopped accepting their treatment. When guilt didn't bring me back, they switched tactics again. This time, Dad actually sent me an email, which honestly made me laugh because he could barely work his own phone without asking someone for help. His message was short, cold, and painfully revealing. "We're still your legal family. Don't think you can erase that." There was no love behind those words. No regret. No attempt to fix anything. It was just another reminder that, in his mind, family had never been about love, trust, or respect. To him, it was about possession. At first, Liam and I made jokes about the whole thing. We even created imaginary bingo cards predicting which guilt trip they'd try next. "You're abandoning your real family. You're being selfish. You'll regret this one day." It became almost entertaining because they were so unbelievably predictable. At least it stayed funny until they decided to show up at our house. It happened on a Thursday morning while I was working remotely from our living room. Liam was in the kitchen making breakfast, happily humming along to one of those cheesy early 2000s songs when someone started pounding on the front door. It wasn't the kind of knock a visitor gives. It was loud, impatient, and relentless. Liam froze with the spatula still in his hand and looked over at me. "Are we expecting somebody?" he asked. I slowly shook my head as a knot formed in my stomach. Something told me exactly who was standing outside. I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. Sure enough, there they were. Mom, Dad, Chloe, and Derek were all squeezed together on our tiny front porch, like they were posing for the world's most uncomfortable family photo. Mom stood in front holding a casserole dish, almost like she'd brought some ridiculous peace offering while wearing that painfully fake smile she always used when she wanted something. Dad stood beside her with his usual hard expression, looking irritated before anyone had even said a word. Chloe hid behind a pair of oversized sunglasses as if she couldn't bear to look at me, while Derek barely seemed interested at all, standing there scrolling through his phone. I had absolutely no intention of opening the door. Instead, I unlocked the nearby window and slid it open just enough so we could hear each other. "Hi, sweetheart," Mom called out in an overly cheerful voice. "We thought we'd stop by so we could all sit down and talk. You know, like a family." Her voice was dripping with fake sweetness, the exact tone she always used whenever she was trying to hide how angry she really was. I kept my own voice calm and steady. "No thanks," I replied. "We're busy." For a second, nobody spoke. Then Dad stepped closer to the window and barked, "Olivia, enough with this ridiculous nonsense. We're not leaving until you come outside and face your family." Liam stepped up behind me and gently slipped his hands into mine. I could see the color had drained from his face. Keeping his voice low, he whispered, "They're not just going to leave, are they?" I quietly shook my head. "No," I answered. "They won't." From where I stood, I watched Mom's fake smile slowly disappear. She dropped the casserole dish onto the porch railing with a heavy thud before folding her arms across her chest. "This isn't who you are, Olivia," she said. "You're not this cold. You're not this heartless. Her voice cracked just enough to make it sound like she was the one being wronged, as if all those years of excluding me, mocking me, and pretending I didn't exist had somehow never happened. Chloe immediately jumped in, sliding her sunglasses down just enough to glare at Liam. "He's turning you against us," she snapped. "He's poisoning you." That was the moment I'd had enough. I pushed the window open a little farther, looked Chloe straight in the eyes, and calmly replied, "Nobody poisoned me. You managed to do that all by yourselves." The smug expression vanished from her face in an instant. Derek finally looked up from his phone, clearly annoyed. "Seriously, Olivia?" he scoffed. "Grow up already. You're throwing away your real family because of what? A few hurt feelings? Give me a break." Liam squeezed my hand even tighter. I could feel a slight tremble running through him. Not because he was afraid, but because he was trying to keep his anger under control. I took a slow breath and answered as calmly as I could. "You didn't want me at your weddings. You didn't want me around for holidays. You didn't want me included during any of the moments that actually mattered. So now you don't get to show up and force your way back into my life just because it suddenly suits you. You made your decision years ago. Now I've made mine." Mom's entire expression changed. The fake tears disappeared, replaced by pure anger. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "When everyone else is gone and you've got nobody left, you'll wish you hadn't pushed your family away." I smiled, a real smile this time, one that came from a place of peace, and answered, "I've already got everything I need." Then I quietly slid the window shut. I didn't slam it. I didn't yell. I didn't insult anyone. I simply closed it and shut them out of my life once again. For a few seconds, everything outside went completely silent. Then the pounding started. Fists slammed against the front door, followed by angry shouting that echoed through the house. Liam gently pulled me backward toward the kitchen. "Should we call the police?" he asked. I had just opened my mouth to answer when we both heard it. A sharp cracking sound followed almost immediately by another. They weren't standing outside arguing anymore. They were trying to force their way into our home. Oddly enough, I didn't panic. It wasn't because I wasn't scared. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and every instinct told me something was terribly wrong. But another part of me had changed. The version of myself that used to freeze, beg for acceptance, or keep hoping they'd suddenly become different people. That part no longer existed. It had finally burned itself out. I looked over at Liam. His hands were wrapped around mine so tightly that his knuckles had turned completely white. In that moment, I understood this wasn't about fear anymore. It was about making absolutely sure they would never have another chance to hurt me again. "Call the police," I said quietly, keeping my voice calm and steady. Liam didn't waste a second. He grabbed his phone, moved behind the kitchen counter, and immediately dialed. I stayed exactly where I was, standing between him and the front door while the pounding grew louder and more desperate with every passing second. "We're not leaving without you, Olivia," Dad shouted from outside, his voice filled with anger. "You're coming out here and you're going to talk to us." Another hard slam rattled the entire door in its frame. I could hear Mom screaming about ungrateful children and traitors, Chloe muttering curses under her breath, and, as usual, Derek trying to outshout everyone else. He yelled that I'd regret this one day, and claimed nobody else would ever put up with me once Liam supposedly figured out who I really was. I didn't answer a single word. I didn't even react. I just stood there, breathing slowly and keeping myself as calm as I could, until I heard the most comforting sound imaginable, the faint cry of approaching police sirens. The pounding stopped almost instantly. I walked over to the window just in time to watch Mom hurriedly grab the casserole dish off the porch, as if carrying it would somehow make them look innocent. Dad immediately started barking orders at Chloe and Derek, telling everyone to act normal. Within seconds, they were awkwardly spreading out across the porch, pretending they'd simply been standing there having an ordinary conversation instead of trying to break into my house. The police cruiser pulled into the driveway at a good speed, its tires crunching across the gravel before coming to a stop. 2 officers stepped out, one man and one woman, both wearing the exhausted expressions of people who had probably dealt with far too many situations exactly like this. I carefully opened the front door and stepped outside with my hands visible so there wouldn't be any confusion about who had called. "Good morning, officers," I said calmly. "Thanks for coming." The female officer gave me a nod before asking, "We received a report about a disturbance. Can you tell us what's been happening here?" Before I even had a chance to answer, Mom rushed forward, still clutching that casserole dish against her chest like it was some kind of shield. With fake tears already forming in her eyes, she said, "This is our daughter. We're only trying to talk to her. That man has completely brainwashed her." She pointed dramatically toward the house where Liam was cautiously looking through the living room curtain. Now she thinks she can cut her own family out of her life. The officer barely reacted. Instead, she calmly asked, "So you're saying you weren't attempting to force your way into the house?" Mom looked completely caught off guard. No, of course not, she blurted out. She wouldn't answer the door, and we just needed to speak with her. Dad stepped forward the way he always did whenever he thought intimidation might solve the problem. We have every right to see her, he said firmly. She's our daughter. The male officer let out a tired sigh as he pulled a small notebook from his pocket. Sir, that's not how the law works. Your daughter is an adult. You do not have the legal right to enter her home without permission. If you continue harassing or threatening her, she has every right to pursue criminal charges. I watched the color drain from Mom's face. Chloe quietly muttered something under her breath, and Derek actually rolled his eyes as though he were the victim in all of this. Taking one slow breath, I looked directly at the officers and spoke loudly enough for my entire family to hear. I'd like to press charges for trespassing and attempted forced entry. And I also want to file for a restraining order. For the first time that entire morning, absolute silence settled over the porch. Mom's jaw slowly dropped open. Dad's face turned a deep shade of red. Chloe's sunglasses slipped halfway down her nose, and even Derek instinctively took a step backward, looking completely stunned by what he'd just heard. You don't really mean that, Mom whispered shakily. Olivia, we're family. Hearing her say the word family didn't make me angry anymore. It didn't make me sad either. It simply confirmed what I already knew. I looked straight into her eyes and answered without hesitation. No, we're not. Not anymore. After that, the officers separated everyone while they took statements and asked questions. Liam eventually came outside and stood beside me, holding my hand the entire time with the same quiet strength he'd shown all day. Meanwhile, my family cycled through every strategy they could think of. One minute they begged, the next they threatened, and then they switched to guilt just as quickly. Mom cried about losing her daughter. Dad complained about ungrateful children. Chloe tried to shame me, insisting that only someone deeply broken would ever turn their back on family. Derek mostly stood there wearing the same smug expression, acting as though the entire situation was beneath him. None of it made the slightest difference. The officers weren't convinced by any of it. They issued a formal warning right there on the spot and made it perfectly clear that if any of them came back to our home again, they would be arrested immediately. That very afternoon, I completed all the paperwork for the restraining order. It only took a handful of signatures and a few legal documents, but with that, the final door between us closed for good, and this time, it would never be opened again. The days after everything happened were surprisingly quiet, almost unsettlingly quiet. The angry phone calls stopped. The guilt-filled messages disappeared. Even the dramatic Facebook posts came to an end. It felt like my family had finally accepted that they no longer had any control over me, no matter how badly they wanted it back. That doesn't mean everything became easy overnight. I'd be lying if I said it never hurt. Every now and then, usually when I least expected it, I'd catch myself missing the idea of having a family. Not the family I actually had, but the one I always wished existed. I found myself wondering what life could have been like if they'd chosen kindness instead of rejection. The holidays were probably the hardest part. Watching other families gather around a table, laughing together and sharing stories, left a quiet ache inside me that didn't disappear overnight. But little by little, that empty space began to fill with something much better. It filled with people who truly cared about me, real friends. The family I chose for myself was people who loved me not because they shared my last name, but because they genuinely wanted me in their lives. They accepted me exactly as I was and never made me question whether I belonged. Liam's parents welcomed me into their family without hesitation, treating me like another daughter from the very beginning. My coworkers surprised us after our honeymoon with a celebration at the office, complete with a cake that read, "Welcome to your real family." Even our neighbors showed up with homemade casseroles and handwritten cards after they heard about the restraining order, not because they felt sorry for us, but because they respected our decision to remove toxic people from our lives. One piece at a time, I built the life I'd spent years dreaming about. It wasn't the future my family expected me to have or the lonely life they left me to figure out on my own. It was my life, built on love, respect, and peace. About 8 months after our wedding, Liam and I invited a few close friends over for a simple backyard barbecue. Nothing fancy, just good food, plenty of laughter, and people we genuinely enjoyed being around. At one point, I stepped away with a drink in my hand and quietly looked around the yard. I watched my husband laughing so hard with his best friend over a batch of badly burned burgers that they could barely breathe. I smiled as our neighbors' kids ran across the grass chasing one another with water guns, filling the air with laughter. Everywhere I looked, I saw people who loved me exactly as I was, without expecting me to earn it. That's when something really hit me. My family hadn't just missed our wedding. They had missed everything that came afterward. Every happy memory, every celebration, every milestone, and every ordinary day that turned out to be beautiful simply because it was shared with people who cared. They lost all of that because they never chose to love me the way I deserved to be loved. And for the first time in my entire life, that realization didn't make me sad. It made me feel lighter than I'd ever felt before. I was finally free, completely, genuinely free. And I knew there was nothing in the world that could convince me to give that freedom up again. Not for anyone, especially not for people who had only ever viewed me as someone they had the right to control. As the evening faded into night and the sky filled with fireflies, Liam slipped his hand into mine and gently rested his head against my shoulder. "We built a pretty good life together," he whispered. I smiled, kissed the top of his head, and quietly answered, "Yeah, and we really did." And in that moment, I knew with complete certainty that what we'd built together was ours, and no one would ever be able to take it away from us.